Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a new EBD seminar. I am María José Ruiz, and I'm going to be introducing our speaker today. And Irene Mendoza is going to be moderating the questions afterwards. So before I introduce our speaker, just a couple of reminders. If you need a certificate of attendance, please write down your name in the chat in YouTube and then send an email to seminars@ebd-CSIC.es. If you want to make any questions to our speaker, write them down in the YouTube chat as well, and then Irene will make those questions to our speaker. So today we have Manuel Díaz Fernandez with us. He's a PhD student here at EBD in the Conservation Biology department. He's a second-year PhD student, and his research is very interesting, and actually this talk is really timely because he is studying bears and conservation challenges for the Cantabrian bear population. So Manu, when you are ready, you can start. Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you, María José, and hello, everyone. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for all the people that organized the seminar, because I had this talk 2 weeks ago, but I was sick and with a lot of fever, so thank you for change to a close date. And well, I'm going to talk about my PhD project that deals with the new conservation challenges of the Cantabrian brown bear population in humanized environments. And to start, I'm going to give you a small introduction about the large carnivore, because the brown bear is a large carnivore. And I'm going to give you an introduction about few peculiarities that this group of species has in relation with humans. Well, the human impact and the human activities and their impacts, such as the fragmentation or habitat loss, has special importance in this group of species, mainly due to a couple of things. The first one is that they have a great special needs, and the second one is that they have a historical conflict with human societies. This conflict is caused by the competition for resources, and this competition for resources results in the direct persecution of these species, and as a consequence, the direct or indirect mortality. But well, despite all these problems of coexisting with the humans, many carnivore populations of the world, and especially in Europe, are recovering their populations in the recent years due to different factors, like the rural exodus, the conservation of the management policies, and also the environmental education programs. Reducing the pressure on these species results in an increase in the abundance and also a recovery of part of the past distribution, especially in those areas with low human activity and good natural conditions. As a consequence, and like a loop, the recovery of these populations brings with new challenges or with new problems with these species. Increasing property damages, interaction with humans, mortality, attacks, different scenarios that can lead to a loss of the good perception that this species has in the society, and end with a conflict situation. Here in Spain, we have a clear example with the wolf, that is a species that deals between the conservation interest and also with the conflict with some social sector like the livestock owners. Well, in my PhD project, we work with the Cantabrian brown bear, that is a large carnivore, and I'm going to give you a small background about this population and its recent history. This population is located in the north of Spain, in the Cantabrian mountains. It's distributed in 4 autonomies: Asturias, Cantabria, Castilla y León, and Galicia. And this population suffered some changes, especially during the 20th century. Today, it's a flagship species in the places where it lives, but this has not always been the case. During the 20th century, it suffered a marked decline, especially due to external factors like the human impact. And it is not until 1973 when it's declared as a protected species. But the population continues decrease until the beginning of the 90s, when it reached the minimum of the historical minimum, with less than 100 individuals separated in two isolated subpopulations. From there, and thanks in part to the conservation efforts with the creation of the recovery plans, the foundation of different organizations for conservation of the species, the populations begin to recover, increasing the abundance, recovering part of the distribution, and also reestablish the connection between the two populations. Well, as a consequence, with this increase in the population, in the distribution, the colonization of new areas, the property damages and also in general the interaction with humans have also increased. This situation can lead to a loss of the good perception that the society has of these species. And this loss of the good perception can result in problems and conflict between humans and the birds. And these problems and these conflict scenarios go in the opposite direction of the conservation and management policies. So as a consequence, these consequences of the population increase must be addressed to ensure the conservation of the population in the medium and long term. And that is why in my PhD project, the main aim that we have is to evaluate and analyze these aspects that are related to the current distribution of the Cantabrian brown bear. So, well, after this introduction, I can start with the chapter 1. And as I was talking about the changes in the population trend, especially since the end of the 20th century, in this chapter, we are going to evaluate the changes in the distribution of the Cantabrian brown bear population and the implications that these have for the conservation and the management. Well, in this chapter, we have three main objectives. The first one is to evaluate the changes in the range between 3 periods of 10 years. Then we wanted to compare the areas colonized with the extinct or not colonized ones as a function of habitat quality. And finally, we want to compare the current situation of the Cantabrian brown bear and the future perspective with the areas of action of the recovery plans that are the main management tool that this population have. To do that, we collect some data sets of the different type of data of their presence, like direct or indirect observation, damages, or female with calves data. And we collect this data from 1982 to 2012, creating a big window of 30 years that we divide in 3 periods of 10 years to compare the distribution between them. Also, to compare the areas colonized with the extinct and not colonized ones, we use 2 indexes of habitat quality created by Jody Martin and collaborators in 2012, an index with human habitat predictors and the other index with natural habitat predictors, defining these 2 indexes for each grid cell that is our unit of analysis. And finally, for the analysis, we use generalized linear models as a binomial function, colonization versus extinction or not colonization, that I'm going to explain the difference then. And as explanatory variable, together with the habitat quality, we use the distance of each grid cell to the center of the subpopulation. As we already have resolved in this chapter, I am going to explain them briefly. And in these maps, we show the changes in the distribution between the different periods. And we can observe a slight decrease between the first 2 periods, and then a large increase for the 3rd period, where we can see as something more similar to a single population and not too separated. These results agrees with bibliography that talks about the population trend, which seems that the population reached the minimum at the beginning of the 90s in this 2nd period, and then after the conservation efforts, the population start to increase in abundance, and this increase in abundance translate in the 3rd period to increase in the distribution. Well, we also have results of the influence of the different variables in the changes between periods. And I have to explain that here we did not compare exactly the same in the changes between the first 2 periods than in the changes between the 2nd and the 3rd period. In the changes between the first 2 periods, we compare the colonized grid cells with the extinct grid cells because we had a good number of both. However, in the changes between the second to the third period, that is when the population expansion occurs, as we can remind. we had not extinct cells, so we had to compare the colonized cells in the third period with those adjacent to this second period, but that were not colonized in the third period. In the results of this analysis, we find that in the first transition, we find that the territories with good natural habitat conditions were those that were colonized. However, those with good human habitat conditions disappeared. And in the second transition, we find that the areas with good human habitat conditions for the bears were those that were colonized, as well they are territories close to the center of the population. Well, now I'm going to talk about some implication for the conservation that this result has. And with the distribution of our third period, we have an update of the Cantabrian brown bear distribution. This allows us to assess some implication for the management and the conservation of the species. Because when we see the area of action of the recovery plans that are the main management tool of the Cantabrian brown bear that were created in the beginning of the 90s, and only Asturias update the recovery plan in 2002, when we compare these areas, these black or gray areas, with the blue areas of the distribution of the third period, we find clear differences. Only around 50% of the distribution of the third period is covered by the areas of the recovery plans. And what does this imply? Well, it does imply, for example, that in the new areas of expansion, they are colonized mainly by subadult dispersing mites, according to the bibliography. This type of bears have also a more tendency to provoke damages or to approach to anthropogenic food resources than other bears. And what is the problem with that? Well, outside these recovery plans areas, there are differences in the path for damage prevention measures. So we find with the problem that there are bears colonizing areas outside these recovery plans with a more tendency to provoke damages, and the owners of these areas have less else to protect their protection. So this can result in a discomfort in the society and, of course, in a conflict scenario. In addition to these results, we use the model of change between the second and the third period, that is when the expansion occurs, to project a new period of another 10 years, an hypothetical period between 2013 and 2022, with the probability of occupation. What we find is that the probability of occupation of this hypothetical period that could be a current scenario, it's much bigger even than the distribution of the third period. With these results, we think that the administration should update these recovery plans areas to avoid possible conflict scenarios. The idea is to prevent the problem, promoting acts for prevention and compensation for the damages, and allow that the new areas of expansion of these species not to be a problem and a future or present conflict scenario. Well, finishing with the chapter 1, I am going to talk about the chapter 2, that is titled is Social Perception of the Brown Bear and its interaction with humans. And well, when we are talking about presence of bears in inhabited areas, interaction with humans, and also possible conflict scenarios, it's very important, or a very important part of the conservation challenge is to know what people think about it. How do they perceive the bears? What is a problem or conflict for them? Or how will they solve this problem of conflict? And how can we know the perception and the opinion of the people? Well, the answer is asking them by conducting surveys. And this was what we want to do in this chapter. And the aim that we have with this chapter is, on the one hand, we want to compare the difference in the perception about bears and the interaction between them and humans in different social sectors. And on the other hand, we want to compare the difference in the perception between people who live inside bird distribution areas and people who live outside bird distribution areas or in the edge. Well, to evaluate the different perceptions of these social groups, we select these three that are the field guards or rangers, the beekeepers, and the general public. Understanding this general public as people who live in towns or cities, but don't do any activity that can be involved in an incident with birds. We select these three groups because we think that they cover quite well the different perspectives or opinions that could exist in the society about the Cantabrian brown bear, and especially about the problems with the brown bear. We hope to find difference, for example, between field guards and beekeepers about the damages, because the beekeepers, as the main victims of the bears managers, of the bears damages, sorry, they maybe have a worse view and a more subjective view of the problem than rangers that are the managers of this type of situation with bears, and they should have a more neutral and objective. Well, our survey consists in different parts. First, general parts with information about the description of the person, with the age, gender, place of residence, studies. Then a specific description within the social group, for example, the age that the year that they are working as a field guard or as a beekeeper, areas where they work, previous experience. And then in the part more related to the bears, we have a general part of perception of the brown bear and its conservation and management. And finally, a series of questions of specific problems with bears. These specific problems are the damages, the presence of bears in inhabited areas, and finally, the attacks on people. We already start with these surveys, especially with the field guards and beekeepers, and we collect until now around 100 surveys from the beekeepers and around 40 for the field guards. Well, and now we can go with the chapter 3, where we deal with the situation with the situation of presence of brown bears in inhabited areas. This is one of the consequences of the population growth, and this seems to be more and more frequent in the recent years. Here I put some news about this type of incidents. For example, these two are from Asturias in the recent weeks. And this is mainly one of the most striking problems with bears, because although it is something more frequent or more common in other populations of the world, like black bears in North America or brown bears in other populations of the world, it is not something frequent in the Cantabrian range. It is true that in the Cantabrian range, the brown bear approach to the village to feed on the fruit trees, but this behavior were not considered as a problem because they usually avoid interaction with humans by performing these internships during night or not for being for a long time in the areas. The problem, however, starts when we begin to detect cases of food conditioned bears and habituated bear that could result in a problem bear, which is something too difficult to define. And well, in this chapter, this is what we want to do. We want to collect and characterize these events of bear presence in inhabited areas, to analyze which variables can have an influence in this type of behavior in the Cantabrian range. To do this, we have a first part of collecting process that this is not so simple because in the Cantabrian range, as these situations were not frequent, the administration, especially the Asturias administration, that is with one that I was working, didn't collect these cases in a formal way. So we depend on the information that the field guards and other people who works with bird conservation can provide us. And this information vary a lot between people. There are field guards, for example, that are very interested in this type of situations, and they take their own notes describing very well these incidents. But in other cases, the field guard only can remember some cases from some years ago. So the difficult part of this collecting process is to collect well all these cases and remove those situations that are not what we are trying to find. Well, after the collecting process, the idea is to go to the areas where these incidents occur with the bears are in the village and collect information at different levels. For example, characteristic of the town and surroundings, the trophic attractants and their protection, the type of bird and also the behavior that they have. If there was an interaction with people, what type of interaction and what behavior have the people, and also if the administration ordered to take dissuasive measures to change this type of behaviors, we want to know what type of dissuasive measures they take and what was the effect of these measures on the behavior of the bird. Well, I forgot to say that I start with this work also, but we are with the collecting process together with the surveys, and it is difficult to say now the number of these cases that we have in the country because we have to remove obviously some of these cases, and we have around 15 cases in the part of Asturias, and we are waiting for the information from the part of León. But I was talking yesterday with one of the people in charge of the administration of León, and they told us that in the last year, in 2020, there were around 17 cases of this incident of urban birds in the province of León. So, well, now I am going to talk about the last chapter of my PhD that, although it is in my plan of thesis, we don't start to work with it because we cannot. So the information that I can tell you now is very provisional information. But in this chapter, we are going to work with the most common interaction between birds and humans in the Cantabrian mountains, that are the damages to the property. And these incidents with birds are common around the world, and also in the Cantabrian range, that have been increasing over the time, matching with the population increase. We have different type of damages. The most abundant are damages to beehives, livestock and crops, especially the fruit trees. And also we have another types like material damages, such as rubbish bins, cars, infrastructure, and others like damages on pets. Well, these cases, these damages have been well studied in the Cantabrian range with multitude of scientific and technical works about abundance, distribution patterns, or even other protection measures. But what we want to do in this chapter is to create a risk map to detect or to predict areas with high potential for bird damages. We want to do this risk map with the damages on beehives because they are the most abundant and because we have some data sets and information available to work with. And what type of information we have available? Well, we have data sets about damages number and distribution in the Cantabrian mountains, that is collected in an administrative level. We have also the trophic resource availability, beehives in this case, that is also collected in the administrative level. And we can also use the bird presence probability that we can predict with the very present data and also with the habitat suitability that we've seen in the first chapter. And this information we can take at the grid level. Well, the complexity of this type of risk map depends a lot of the information that you have available. You can do a risk map with multiple spatial scale. For example, here in the Cantabrian range, we have scale, but you can use other variables in the grid level scale. So it depends a lot of the information that you have. And also you can add some other scales like the temporal scale, because in the Cantabrian range, we have available the data of female with calves for each year. So this data of female with calf for each year is related to the numbers of damages in the next year. So as I said before, it's very provisional information, but it's very complex, this type of risk map. And I have to say that for this chapter, we are going to collaborate with people from the Institute of Nature Conservation of the Polish Academy of Science, because they are doing a similar risk map, but with their own data. So to finish, I want to thanks to all the people that allow me to do this PhD, especially my supervisor, the department, the HIGIS and Teledetection department, and also to all the people outside the Estación Biológica that collaborate with us to do this project. And thank you all for being here listening to me today, and that's all for my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manu. Irene, do you want to? I don't know if Irene is connected or not connected.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Manu. Sorry, I had a last minute call just now. So it was a great talk, and I think people are gonna ask soon, but while they are asking and they are like having their questions, I wanted to ask you, why do you think that? Because in the first chapter you put like a map, no, of the areas where the birds appear, and the areas where, I mean, the last map you put, no, this one, the red and blue.
Okay.
So the red is the areas that were occupied, and then now the projections you have done. No? So and the thing is expanding much more than, I mean, that was before. And do you think this is, I mean, why do you think is the reason that they are expanding to those areas? Because another thing that could happen is that the density of the population increase in the areas where it was before, because maybe the habitat is more suitable. But do you think there is, I mean, the reasons for explaining this expansion? What do you think?
Yeah, as you say, there are works that talk about that the density are increasing more than the expansion. Okay, and I think that this is one of the main reasons that the subadult males don't have good habitat areas, because these areas are colonized by the adult males, and this is one of the main reasons for the dispersion of these subadults. So maybe these subadults are colonizing areas with not good natural habitat conditions, but areas where they can survive, avoiding the competition with other adult males that can kill them. Or
it's because the birds need a very large home range, no? So they cannot really coexist, no? Okay. And there is a question from Carles Villar. He says, thank you so much for an interesting talk. Lots of the data that you are using derives from administrations and external sources. Any comment on data quality, reliability?
Yeah, I sent this paper some months ago, and the editor and reviewers asked me the same thing. But most of these data are collected by qualified workers, mainly by field guards and technicians. So I think that we can trust this data because it's not collected by people from the towns or something similar. There are some data sets or parts of the data set collected by interviews to the people of the towns, so they can. There are some data that could be at least less reliable than others, but I think that most of the data is good.
And do you think maybe because you have data from different administrations, right? From Castilla y León, Asturias, Cantabria.
Yeah.
So do all of them collect the data in the same way, or they have a bias? I mean, you have like a different way of getting the data, and that means that you can have a bias.
I think that the collecting process is similar between administration.
Okay. Also, Miguel Clavero, he says, great, Manuel. A pity that you didn't have the data, the general public perception survey. It would have been great to repeat it now after the attack of the woman that has had a huge media response. Do you think that the incident can affect the comparison of the survey results between beekeepers and rangers before the incident and the general public after?
Yeah. I think that I don't know how can we solve this problem that emerged these days, because obviously, if we continue with the surveys to the general public or beekeepers, especially in those areas close to the attack, it's going to change a lot the perception in these recent days than the perception that they had days ago. So I will try to find information about how to solve this type of problems when you are with a current study of surveys and an incident like this occurs in the middle, because it's complicated for the results, I think.
Yeah, I think maybe, I mean, maybe this is a suggestion, but maybe you could compare like repeating the survey. I know this is a lot of work, but maybe comparing the survey, repeating the surveys and comparing what were the keepers thinking and the other people thinking. The problem is you didn't have the general public yet, right? So you have rangers and beekeepers, no?
Yeah.
But maybe they have also changed their opinion. So you could maybe take advantage of the incident to see how the incident is affecting the responses.
Yeah, maybe it's a good point to repeat the surveys to the people that answered before, because I think that we are changing the perspective.
Yeah, Miguel is just saying the same. Miguel Clavel is just saying the same. Maybe repeating the survey for beekeepers and rangers. Yeah. So the point, you don't have the control for the general public, no? But yeah.
Can I ask something related with this? Because this was one of my questions. So when you have that survey and you have the beekeepers, but then you have general public, to me, general public can be divided into very different people. Like you would have general public that lives around the bears, and then you have the ones that live in Gijón, Santander, and Bilbao, and spend every weekend maybe going back to the villages where their parents were born, but they don't live all the time there. So there are very different views, and I think that is related with what Miguel said. What someone that lives there all the time is going to think about the attack. It's not necessarily going to be the same version that the one that lives in Gijón.
Yeah, of course. Of course, inside the general public, I hope to find.
So how do you address that?
Yeah.
So are you asking where do they live, or?
Yeah. We are asking where they live, and we are going to separate. I don't know the fields that we will put, but maybe the best way to separate is the rural areas and urban areas. To simplify, but we can. The idea is to analyze the place where they live.
Okay, this is also linked with what Ruben Bernardo is asking. He says, thank you so much for the talk. I have a doubt about the questionnaire. Sorry if you have mentioned it and I haven't heard about it. From my lack of knowledge of the subject, I suppose that this type of social studies control possible biases of the people consulted. So it's a little bit the same. For example, people tend to answer things they expect the evaluators to expect. Have you checked for these other possible biases?
No, I don't check this possible bias, but for example, we are trying to avoid to do the surveys in our presence. For example, with the field gas, I send I go to the office where they work, and I let the service to let them to answer this service. And for example, with the beekeepers, I send them by online form, by mail or WhatsApp groups, because I think that and there are some studies that talks about there are difference in the response if you are in front of the person that you are asking and if you are not in front. So there are some bias of this type, but we don't check if they can affect what the response, what we expect to respond then. So yeah, it's a point to analyze.
Yeah, also because I guess that if for a ranger you say that, I mean, if a ranger thinks that the bird should disappear, like something like it maybe it's not politically correct, it's not gonna tell you. I mean, it's better to say that if in an anonymous way, not just.
Yeah, it's in an anonymous way. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Carles is asking you more questions. Okay. Carles Villar, he says, I'm from the area with brown bear conflict in the Pyrenees. The perception about the bear seems to be different in the Pyrenees and the Cantabrian mountains. Yeah. Do you think that the differences are due to the different management policies or tradition of coexistence with bears in the Cantabrian mountains?
I think that I know some of the perception that the people have in the Pyrenees, and I think that it's a mix of some things. For example, in the Cantabrian mountains, people from some areas, for example, Somiedo, Cangas del Narcea, Degaña, Ibias, and other parts of the north of León, coexist with the bear population all these lives, even when the population was in its minimum. So I think that it could affect a lot to the perception, because in the Pyrenees there are some areas without bear distribution or without bear presence for some years or decades. So the livestock owners, or for example, are not prepared to live with this problem, because at the end the conflict scenario is a human perspective. The conflict for a bear is not to find food or not to be killed by another bear, but it's a human perspective, and it could set a conflict with 6 attacks in a year to livestock, or couldn't exist a conflict with 30 attacks in a year in other places, but in the year before you have 50 attacks, the relation is different than in the places where they don't have bears. So yes, I think that it depends on many things. Also the management of the population, because for example, I don't know exactly how the administration of the Pyrenees do the prevention and the compensation damage measures, but it's also can explain some of the perception that they have.
By the way, your questionnaire is only for Asturias or for the whole?
No, it's for Asturias and for León.
But not for the Pyrenees?
No, not for the Pyrenees. No.
Okay. Also, Carlos says, but interestingly, the main voices against bears in the Pyrenees do not come from farmers, but from hunters.
Yeah. So, yeah, we don't think about hunters to do the survey, but it's gonna be a good point. But the thing is that for reason also for methodology and time, we have to select some objective groups, and we think that to cover the people who manage the population, that are the field guards, people who are the main victims of damages in the Cantabrian range, that are the beekeepers, and the perception of a general public that don't have to direct relation with bird incidents, I think that we can cover quite well the perspective of the society. Yes, we can. We also let outside hunters, or for example, livestock owners that maybe they have a different perception than beekeepers, but we cannot do anything. So that's our questionnaire. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Carlos says limitations to hunting rights. Like, I mean, I recall now that there was like the last 2 bears that were killed killed by hunters, no?
Yeah.
So they are a big part. I mean, they are very implied in the conservation.
Yep. I would like to follow on this question of the segmentation of the survey. Is it possible for you, using the other variables, to try and go further, or to further explore the different conflict of interests that the different sectors of the society can have with respect to the bears? Like, for example, like doing what you just did by separating beekeepers from general population. Yep. But trying to use more variables to try and separate more, to try and create more categories that could give you a better idea on which is the conflict of interest for different sections of the society. Like Carles Viles just tries to adapt the question of hunters that might be interested in transform the bear in a huntable, in a game species.
Yeah, for example, we also have questions in the questionnaire about if the rangers or field or beekeepers hunt now or in the past. Also, if for example, inside the beekeepers, we difference between beekeepers that suffer damages before from the bears and beekeepers who don't suffer, even living all in bear distribution areas. So inside the questionnaire, we can categorize more groups inside these 3 main objective groups.
Great. I have another question. If there is there anybody waiting for? So I have another question about well, we have seen many videos about bears transgrading parks, urban parks. You show it, roads, etc. In these countries where the incidence of bears in urban areas is more frequent, do they have in countries where you find more bears in cities or towns? Are there which you find that there will be would it be the key technique that might be implemented here in Spain to deal with the growing bear population?
Okay, I think that the key technique is that, well, for example, in Scandinavia, they study a lot the hypothesis that provoke that the bears approach to the human settlements. But the main reason that appear to be correct is that the subadult males and also the female with cubs try to avoid the good habitat condition where adult males are colonized these areas, and they are close to worse habitat areas that are close to the human settlement. But after that, we have with the problem if a bird is close to a human settlement, can be a food conditioned bear or an habituation bear, or none of them. Okay, so most of the bears that goes to the human settlements, finally, even they are not a food conditioned bear, finally they feed on the anthropogenic food resources if exists. So for me, the best measure that we can take is to protect these these anthropogenic food resources, because if the birds try to go again and again, and they cannot feed on these resources, they finally go to another places because they cannot survive in those places. So first thing is to protect, to use prevention measures, and then it's important to have a good protocol to use dissuasive measures with the birds, but a clear protocol, because, for example, in Asturias, what I can take from different field guards is that the actuation vary a lot with similar cases. So I think that it's important to have a clear protocol to actuate quickly and to be efficient.
Do you think that any dissuasion measure, like you know, a scent from an older male, or some dissuasive scent or things like that, are especially favorable or useful in these cases?
Yes, I think that are useful, but this is what we're trying to evaluate in the third chapter, because, for example, here in Asturias, 1 month ago, we have a case of a female with calves of the second year, that goes for many nights to 2 or 3 towns here close to Oviedo, so it's not too far. And for example, in this case, the field guards do dissuasive measures. He shots with I don't know, with bullets, but not real the munition. Well, with bullets, with artificial bullets, yeah. And for example, these dissuasive measures, as I think that were taken too late, don't have the results that they expect, and the female with the calves continue entering into the towns. So I think that it's important, the measure and the time and the moment when you take the measure. If you do in the first approach, I think that you can be more efficient than in other situations.
Also, probably what you said before about the age really matters. There was a video going around about the black bear in California getting into it was a female with calves going into a terrace with dogs, and a woman was like pushing the bear. Yeah, and it was like, well, it is a young bear, so you were lucky first. So it also, like, the impact that the measures have, it is not the same, I guess. Like, listening what you said, right? It is not the same. The measure is not going to have the same impact if the bear is a young bear or if it's a more adult, because they have different conditions, like they have been habituated differently, they have different preferences, and they have different needs, right? Do you think that might influence?
Yeah, I think, for example, in this case that I was talking about, the field guard of the area have the impression or have the idea that it's much difficult to dissuasive these young birds that are learning this behavior from his late age, from his young age, than to the mother, to the female, because maybe the female start this behavior when he needs to feed on anthropogenic food because to survive. So I think that they can be different in the age of the birds. Yeah.
So when you said that we need a protocol, do you refer from the administration or like a and also, for instance, like even in the school, like even how to deal with a bear?
Of course. I think that the problem with large carnivores, and of course these conflict scenarios, is a mix of different things. I think that the administration should have a good protocol of actuation. I think that the researchers and the other people who work in the conservation of the brown bear have to give good information to the administration and to other collectives And also, I think a very important part is that the news that the journalists publish have to be realistic and not trying to create an alarm, a social alarm that could result in a conflict where it's not a real problem. So yes, I think that it's a mix between educational, environmental education, administration measures, and also the information that the researchers can give to the population. So yeah.
So I was actually going to ask you, like a lot has to change to reduce the conflict, and that is going to involve educating local population, which is pretty much, that's the easier part, I guess, because they have to live with them. But I think it might be difficult to change the behavior of hikers. That might be more difficult, or people that is in the cities that goes to the mountain, like I want to see a bear, and they don't really realize that it's a big carnivore. Do you think that there would be, that your research could help to inform ways to inform the general public, and like to develop maybe outreach activities or things, or I don't know, even signals that say there you are in bear territory, this is what you can do? How do you see that? Do you think your research could help that to do that a little bit?
Yes, I hope that, because it's one of the main things that make me do this type of project is the applications to the conservation of this species. And I hope that this research can provide information to these hikers, people who practice tourism of observation, that is very typical now in Asturias, because it's important to know what behavior do you have to do in some areas, and especially in areas with a large carnivore that is not a real danger for people, not a problem, but it could be, or this could be a problem in a specific situation. So it's important to give the people advertisement in the routes. It's important to give people instructions on how to behave when you find or you have an encounter with a large carnivore. And also it's important to give the people instruction or ideas on how to practice other practices, like the tourism of observation. So, yes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I don't know if someone else has a new question on the chat. I think nobody's asking anything else, but yeah, it's very. Do you have another question, August?
I have one more thing that I would like to. I just received this with respect to what Miguel Clavero said, that this woman that has been attacked. Yeah. I just received this line saying that talking about the I don't know about the quality of this information, but it says that only 2 people has been hurt by bear attack in the last 30 years. I don't know if you have the data. You can confirm that. But then it says it gives other numbers, like for example, the number of people dead by shooting of hunter in Spain in 1 year can reach to 51 in 1 year, and that the number of people hurt by hunter shoot can go over 600 in 1 year.
Yeah. So
I don't know about the source of these numbers, but maybe giving this kind of info. This how you say, this gouging of the information on the bear attacks might give the general public an idea on how dangerous are they, and what should they be aware of in the field.
Yes, of course. I think that, for example, in some routes that you can do in bear areas, it's good to advertise the people with a panel about the behavior of for example, if you are in the mating session, it's important to advise the people how to behave in this moment, and also put data, for example, 2 or 3 data about these things that you are talking about. For example, how many people dead in a year by brown bears in the Cantabrian rate or in Spain? 0. Or how many people were hurt in the last 30 years? So it's important to put in context the real problem to avoid this possible conflict with the society.
Yeah. Manu, I also have a recommendation for your thesis. I don't know if you have time for that, but I think also when you imply social science, it's always very important to include also an economic evaluation of the conflict. No, so I guess that I guess you have those data, but I think an important also thing to quantify is how much is the damage that the bears take over a year for the farmers, the beekeepers, and so on, and also how much is the cost that the administration is given to those people to compensate for the damage. And I guess that also can be, very important in the evaluation of the conflict, because if the beekeepers, they feel that they are losing much more money than they receive from the administration, so they are always going to be in conflict with the bear. But so I think, I'm not very good at all in economic evaluation of conservation problems, but I think this is also a very important factor to take into account. I don't know if you were thinking to include any economic.
Yes, in the questionnaire, in the survey, for example, in the specific part for the beekeepers, we ask how much costs are for them the damages of birds in the year. Also, how much costs implement they to protect their exploitations, and also if they are, for example, in the part of the perception of the management, we evaluate if they think that the administration have a good actuation for them in order to pay the damages, in order to avoid this problem with bears. So we take in account some of these things inside the questionnaire.
But do you also have the data from the administration of how much money are they paying? Also to compare, because something is what beekeepers believe is the reality, and other thing is what they are really paying. The administration is really paying to the rangers and to the beekeepers for the bear damage.
That those data are public, because you can know how much paid administration to its property at a year. So I think that we can check that information.
Yeah, those that are public, they are also public for wolves. So yeah, they are public. And on talking about the economic, I guess that they also get, like, some areas they sell the bear tourists so they also make money because
for example, in Somiedo is one of the main areas where they can sell the bear image conservation to the public.
Even in Cervera de Pisuerga, that has the smallest population, they have like a bear house, which actually lacks. I don't know if you've been there, but it actually lacks information on how to behave if you find a bear, which I think would be interesting to add. It has a really nice exposition of where bears are and how bears reproduce, but there is no information on, at least there wasn't last time, any information on how to behave if you find a bear. So that you need to tell them to add that.
So I think there are no more questions, and it's almost 2 p.m. So thank you so much, Manu, for your very, very interesting talk.
Thank you again.
I wish you all the best luck with the rest of the PhD. I hope you can take some ideas for implementing them, or just discussing more with your tutors and with your advisors and so on. But I really hope that the comments are gonna give you a feedback for your PhD. And so next week we are gonna have another seminar by Ryan, and sorry, I don't remember his family name. Maddie, can you tell us, because I have forgotten that?
I think it's Bambush. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing it, but Ryan.
Anyway, he's gonna talk us about prey birds, and so it's gonna be also a very interesting talk. And see you next Thursday at 1 p.m. Bye bye.
See you. Bye bye.